make this a secondary tournament and go back to the 2019 format, but bigger. And it's a bit of a drawn out one. So again, you're gonna have to let me get into it. But I think you and I both, I mean, I definitely have the feeling, and I know a lot of people share it, that the MLS Liga MX rivalry is being watered down a bit. You've got Champions Cup, Leagues Cup, Campeones Cup, and USA Mexico plays each other like 7 times a year. Like it's just not what it used to be, right? Add in the fact that this is a tournament that's meant to qualify for Champions Cup. Let's use this as something where we're not seeing the teams that play in Champions Cup play again. So what I mean by that is let this be the competition played by the middle of the pack teams. I've thought this out a little bit. Here's how it could work, but it takes a lot of change, which is why this is like the least likely of all my ideas to happen. First, it means that you need to change the way that Champions Cup spots are earned through the regular season. To me, it would be top 2 to 3 in each conference, depending on Supporter Shield, US Open Cup, MLS Cup. I used 2021 as an example because it was a really good balance where there was the Mickey Mouse COVID Cup Fraud Cup for New York City. The Revs won the Shield, and Atlanta was babied and gifted a Champions Cup for like the 15th year in a row because they canceled the US Open Cup and they finished in fifth, completely undeserved, but we move. In this scenario, it would have been New York City in first, Atlanta in fifth, New York City in fourth from the East. Colorado, Seattle, SKC, 1, 2, and 3 would have been from the West. From this point, those 6 teams do not play in Leagues Cup. The clubs that play in this Leagues Cup can either be all 24 left, or what I would prefer would be the remaining playoff teams from the year before. So for 2021, because it was a shortened playoff season, it would have been Philly, Nashville, Orlando, Red Bull, Portland, Minnesota, Vancouver, RSL. Those would have been the 8 teams in this Leagues Cup tournament. This year, if we were to follow the same scenario, it would be a bit bigger because they expanded the playoffs. It would include the 12 teams, so the 6 teams from each conference that are not in that list. Those 12 teams, and I'll use 12 from this point on, would compete in a pure knockout bracket against the 12 teams from Liga MX. And I'm not really sure how this would work because I don't know Liga MX that well, but I would assume it would mean the winners and the runners up of the Apertura and the Clausura, plus the next 2 highest finishers from the table in the combined table. Those 4 would get the automatic bid to the Champions Cup. Everybody else plays in Leagues Cup. Are you following? Does it make sense?
You lost me ages ago.
Oh my God, you don't know anything.
What do you mean?
So
You couldn't have made
pull
that
up,
sound more confusing.
pull up, pull up
I
the.
agree with you. I need a graphic in front of me.
You do. So I'll send it to you when we're done because it's a lot easier to watch. So if you're listening to this and you're confused and you're not drawing it on a piece of paper, head over to YouTube. It'll have a little graphic that'll walk you through it. From
Here's what
here,
I. Oh, sorry, you're not
go
done.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh no,
No, go ahead.
I'm not done. Of course I'm not done. I've got this whole thing planned out. I'm sending
Hey,
this whole
you really
spreadsheet to
are an
Daddy Don.
MLS shill because you made this
Daddy
as
Don is getting the
complicated.
spreadsheet.
He is literally he has brainwashed you because you've made this as complicated as possible, which is the
It's
absolute
actually
MLS
not.
way.
It's not that
It
complicated.
sounds like it.
Well,
We're
well
still
the reason
talking
it's not
about
it
it. We're like
the re
multiple minutes in.
escucha. The reason it's not complicated is because really the way that it's already done to decide Champions Cup spots, right? It's the top 2 or 3 finishers, and then U.S. Open Cup, MLS Cup, Supporter Shield. So if you're winning the double, for example, like LAFC last year, it just moves down a spot or moves down a spot, right? So it's not that confusing if you consider it that way. But those 12 teams compete in a pure knockout bracket against the 12 teams from Liga MX. And then it's the same way as the current competition. You go in, winner, runner up, and third place can qualify. You can drop it to 1 spot if you really want to. I really don't care but with the expanded Champions Cup, it's probably going to stay at 3 qualifiers, right? But the biggest thing for me is that this shortens the tournament to maybe a week and a half at most, right? You've got, so if it was 12 versus 12 in a knockout style format, it is a play-in round, final, semifinal, quarter, and then it's five games after that, or 5 game week. So you're really playing 6 game weeks at the longest, and the longest it takes 2 weeks. But I think you could probably push it to a week and a half. And to me, that's ideal, right? Because as we mentioned before, stopping it for that long kills a lot of momentum, not only in the regular season, but for those teams that don't make it all the way to the final, you're just kind of hanging around. Not enough fans are around and are diehards where they're going to watch every MLS game that's on or every Liga MX or Liga MX MLS. That's just not the thing that they're doing, right? Especially in a cup competition, they might not understand. So I think this is really nice because not only does it cut down on schedule congestion, but it also, I think, allows the opening for the return to the US Open Cup in full. I think it's super, super low that this possibly takes place because one, it takes away the number of games that are being played, which means less money. It decreases the number of game Apple TV can show, therefore lessens their chance of gaining subscribers. And three, it removes a lot of the big teams from the tournament altogether, which is the main driving force for Liga MX fan attendance. So, pure sporting aspect, I think this makes the most sense. It's closer to what the original concept was back in 2019. And I think it makes the most sense to do because you're not kind of hoarding those Champions Cup spots again. Like Columbus had the chance to do a treble, right? And then now it makes everything all nasty on trying to figure out how this stuff works. This gives a qualification spot to those teams that are maybe close but not close enough. Whether you think that's good or bad, I don't know. But I think it would make the most sense to do. They can back this version of the tournament with this level of advertising it had the last few years and really push it as a premier qualifying tournament for the Champions Cup. I think that's the problem is that the way that you hit this is saying, bang, here you go. This is the premier and easiest way outside of the US Open Cup, which again, whole other option that we've talked about before, which could get you to a Champions Cup and get you 4 games away from playing Real Madrid, which could then raise the prestige of the tournament and people would go for it a little bit more, whatever it may be. But I think this is the best way to do it from a sporting aspect, which means it is the least likely that it's actually going to happen because it doesn't make enough money.
I feel a little bad saying this because you went on for so long about you clearly put a lot of thought into this, but I think this was your worst idea of the episode. If I'm gonna be completely honest with you here.
No, it's a great idea. You're just not smart enough to understand.
So for
What do you
one,
not like about it?
I'll get into it. So for one, as a neutral, and I think for a lot of other people too, and you touched upon this. I know you mentioned this as one of the negatives of this, so I'm not gonna knock you too much for it, but I want to watch the big teams play at this tournament. I want to see
Sure.
LAFC, Giroud, and like Cucho and Columbus play in this tournament. What I don't want to watch is more San Jose. That's what I don't want to watch, if I'm being honest. I want to
San
watch.
Jose's not in the playoffs.
Okay, so then we've limited. Yeah, so it doesn't matter. I don't. So I don't want to watch. Let me think of a good example.
Atlanta? Yeah,
Uh,
me either.
Honestly, yeah, I wouldn't want to watch current state Atlanta right now. That's not what I want to see in this competition. I'd much rather watch Columbus. That was one thing, but you touched upon that, so I don't want to harp on that one too much. I
Right.
personally
That's the
think
reason it's not going to happen.
I personally think this kills US Open Cup even more than Leagues Cup already is, because if I'm a team competing in both the US Open Cup and the Leagues Cup, and I can't compete in the Leagues Cup because I potentially could win the Open Cup, I'm not even going to try in the Open Cup in that case because there's way more money in it in Leagues Cup. So then I'm just going to sack US Open Cup completely, because if I win US Open Cup, I can't compete in Leagues Cup now. So I'd say forget it. Let's just send out whatever. Like if I have to play in this, I'm sending out the youth team, because if I'm going to have a shot at winning something, I want to go win Leagues Cup because I can make a million versus making like a couple bucks.
So this is in the ideal world that we are allowing teams to pick and choose which ones they care about most, right? And we've talked about that with the whole US Open Cup thing is that in the ideal world, we're back in a place where Don Garber says everybody's in. You get to choose whether you use a reserve team, you get to use a U21 team, whatever it may be. You get to pick which path you want to go. So if you get into Leagues Cup, you're like, okay, my bracket's going to take me through Tigres, Chivas, Atlas, Pumas, Puebla, and Club America, and maybe Pachuca Leon, right? Some combination of those. Okay, I'm probably not getting through Leagues Cup there, right? Especially if I'm not a team that is in the top of MLS already. What it does mean is that now I can look at US Open Cup and say, there's not as much money in there, but I have to go through a USL one side, two USL Championship sides and maybe an MLS side, and I get to play in the Champions League, I'm going to put more effort towards there. I think that in the world where you are able to pick and choose this format that is most definitely not going to happen, but it's just a hypothetical. This format allows you a better chance to determine which is which because and again now you talk about redistributing a little bit of money. But if you look at it this way, if we're doing a straight knockout game and you lose in the first round, now you still have a different path to get through in US Open Cup, right? And if you choose to go all out in Leagues Cup and you don't get through, okay, well now I still can do a rotation game in US Open Cup. I can put all my eggs in US Open Cup, and you have to play into what you're doing in the league as well. It makes you think a little bit more about how to go about things and be instead of being told you're going to use US Open Cup as a reserve tournament and you are going to because I mean again we talked about Leagues Cup before where Leagues Cup was used by some teams and apparently according to Dome Torrent if he survives the rest of the season is good next year is going to be used as a reserve tournament for his team. Not everybody plays their best 11. I know there's money on the line, but that doesn't mean that they're playing their best 11 because they're trying to work out other things as well, get healthy and what have you. I think just having more options without having the schedule congestion that we've talked about for the last, hour or so here today is really good. It's really important. That's why I think this is a decent format. And again, I need to say this again. I know it's never going to happen because they were there already. And instead of expanding it to this point, like we've talked about, they went and blew it all the way up to the highest level. I think I liked the 2019 version better if it was marketed better. I didn't even know it was happening until it was over. But I did enjoy the concept. The 2019, if you seriously go on Wikipedia and look at the way the 2019 thing was set up, it just made so much more sense because it should be used as a qualifying tournament, not its own standalone thing that you also qualify for. You know what I mean? Like to me, this is a home run for teams that just want that should be looked at as you can qualify for a tournament through this. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be blown up as the greatest thing since sliced bread. That makes sense?
I don't think it needs to be blown up as the greatest thing since sliced bread either. But I mean, I don't think I wouldn't be putting all my eggs in the basket of I need to win Leagues Cup so I can qualify for the Champions League.
Well, and
I
that's and
think,
that's your choice, right? That's your choice.
but the problem is, and so I wanted to go back to your discussion on you can choose based on like how the layout is looking on whether or not you're going to try for US Open Cup or Leagues Cup. The problem is you have to play in this year you played 3 rounds of US Open Cup before the Leagues Cup even starts. So when US Open Cup is like you're going to play 3 games before you have any idea who you're even going to play against in the Leagues Cup. So it's like how am I supposed to properly assess both when I have to play multiple rounds in the US Open Cup before I can even find out who I'm going to be playing in the Leagues Cup. So I just don't think you could properly decide which tournament you want to put your eggs in because they're not happening simultaneously. So you're not going to
Well, that
know who
that's
you're going to
exact
come
that's
up
exactly
against in
my
Leagues Cup.
that's exactly my point. You go through US Open Cup if you make it down to a point where now you know what the group stages are going to look like. No, I'm sorry, not the group stage. The knockout stages are going to look like, and I know they get reseeded every once in a while. But if you look at it, you go, okay, well, there's two more USL one teams, a bunch of championship teams, but on our side of the bracket, they're relatively low, and we got a couple of lower level MLS sides. Okay, now I know that that's a pretty likely scenario for us if we get it right. Versus going into Leagues Cup, like okay, I've got 3 US Open Cup games done. I know what my team can do. I now look at the draw, and as I mentioned, we have to win a play-in game against Guadalajara, and then travel to Tigres, and then if we get by Tigres, we've got Puebla or we got Pachuca who just won the Champions Cup. Like okay, maybe that's not going to be my strongest thing. Maybe here I can experiment a little bit and figure out what works so that when we get back to the MLS season or the US Open Cup or whatever, now we've got a path forward and say, okay, I can trust this guy here, there, and anywhere. Or I can't trust this guy here, there, and anywhere. But I think just having the option to be able to pick and choose is important. And this goes all the way back to our conversation of teams should still be in the US Open Cup and be able to pick and choose if they care about it or not. It's the same idea in Leagues Cup because I mean, again, I watched Leagues Cup where we started a 16-year-old and our first four subs off the bench were all teenagers from our academy. Like it's quite clear we didn't, value it as highly as we could have. And again, we were injured and stuff, but we weren't the only team to do that. And there were other teams that went out and put starting 11s out every single game, right? And that's just my whole thing is there. But the big overarching preface of this is that I don't need to see the teams that are going to play in Champions Cup continue to play and water down this tournament. And I also don't need to see, Querétaro versus San Jose or New England or Nashville. Like, I don't necessarily need to see those. The only reason that those lower level Liga MX teams are involved here is because they don't have as many teams as us. That's the only, otherwise, I would cut off the bottom 4 or 5 here too, but it just makes the numbers work. I think this should be almost like you've got your qualifiers for Champions Cup, and then there are two more spots on the line that you can earn from the middle of the pack. That's kind of the way I see it.
I feel like it's putting a lot of emphasis on Champions League, and I don't think it's quite fair to the teams that are being successful to be like, sorry, you can't compete in this for this huge prize pool because you're too good, and because all of this is based on Champions League. Whereas, like we talked about earlier in the episode, if they just got rid of the Champions League spots, we'd still watch it anyway. So I don't
Correct.
think
And
Champions League spots should be a decider.
if you came to me with that argument 30 minutes ago, like everything makes sense. Like your stance is fine. Because you're right. The only thing that makes this not work is you're telling teams, "Hey, we're going to put $5 million on the line, but you can't play." And that's totally
Because you're too good.
because you're too good. Right.
It's
And that is
different
a
if you're like,
totally
oh, you didn't qualify for it because you're too bad.
right.
Like,
Right.
you're being like, oh, you're too good. You can't go for this prize pool.
Totally fair. And that I'm okay with you dissenting against.
I was gonna say, I feel like if anything, you should flip it and be like, if you miss the playoffs, you're not in this competition. Like if you finish at the bottom of the table, you don't get to qualify for this competition. At least
I'm
incentivize,
cool with that too.
if we're not gonna have Perel, right? And you're a team that's been knocked out for weeks, like a la Colorado or Toronto last season, give them like at least a little motivation to at least still move up a little bit in the table so that maybe you can qualify for this competition and win the prize pool as opposed to just being like, all right, well, we're 5 weeks out. We've been eliminated. Like, who cares? We're just gonna throw out whoever on the field at this point.
Well, if they were already knocked out, then there's no chance in that scenario that they make the cup, do they? Or the Leagues Cup, do they?
Well, I'm not saying that like you should only have teams that make the playoffs make it, but maybe the cutoff is just a little bit different. I'd have to look into the logistics of it more, in terms of like balancing it out between Liga MX teams and MLS teams. But
And
maybe
that
it's
and that was
like the
where
top 10 in each conference makes it.
well that was where my cutoff went to, right? Where I cut it off at the playoff teams because the numbers made sense and it balanced with League MX well, and it also did, it gave the team something else to play for, right? Again, as you mentioned, there is no pro rel, and not saying that we need it or whatever, like everybody else does, but that's a really good incentive to say, man, not only are you missing out on the playoffs where you can earn yourself a Champions Cup spot that way, but now you're missing out on the opportunity to compete for even more money. Then that ties into the whole, oh, are we going to split up and lose parity and blah, 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 and a whole other conversation. But make it worth something. I'm cool with it. I'm cool with it. Now,
I
I
think
guess the only thing we've missed then is do we include the teams that are already in CCC and yeah, and that's something again in this hypothetical world where we know this may happen versus the real world where we know this is never happening. That's an argument we can have. But
I think the general consensus after all of that is we need some kind of change to the scheduling because it is too long of a hiatus.
yes, I think that is the perfect way to summarize that is at some point we can't take a month off for this thing because you are killing the momentum of the season. you are losing interest from the casuals who are not watching your team for 3 weeks and then are like, oh, wait, the league's back 4 weeks after it started up. And then not only that, you are taking a lot of teams and using this idea of like, oh, we can't play in the U.S. Open Cup because, schedule congestion. And then, half of them are only playing 2 games and then not touching a ball for 3 weeks. It just doesn't line up. And there are different ways to go about it. I think my ideas are great. I think your ideas didn't exist. Did you not? Did you even have an idea today?
My idea was I mean you just completely glossed over it, but my idea was to try to like format it in a way where you could play it mid-week and keep the season going as opposed to pausing it. Obviously, you'd have to change
Uh,
the format of it. I don't think you could do group stages and knockouts. It's you'd be playing midweek games all year long, and that would be too much, I
you would
think.
you would
But
never have a break, would you?
yeah, exactly. But that's why I say you got to just change the format of it. And I think I don't have the logistics of it figured out right now, but I think you would try to format it some way so that it's knockouts, just direct knockouts. And I think it would be faster. And combine it with, I really like your idea of having like the hub and just kind of like putting groups into regions and just playing it all in one location. I think you can move it along much faster that way.